So in this video, we're going to be looking at the setup in the back of the van. I'm going to go through what each part is and what it does, and then I'll show you starting up the machine and shutting it back down again. So in the back of the van, starting off, you've got the tank, okay? This is where all your water is. So the tank then leads into the Waterblaster via this hose here, through the filter, into the pump. You've got the Waterblaster, the engine, the coupling, the pump, and the unloader valve, and then you've got your reel over here with your tap, okay? So to start off and explain what each part is and what it does, first thing is your Waterblaster. So your Waterblaster is made up of a number of different parts. You've got your Honda motor here. This is a GX390 Honda motor. It's a pull start so that it causes less issues. The electrical start can cause problems. We've got a rubber coupling that we get made specially for us. That rubber coupling there is very good for sound and also doesn't allow a lot of heat through to the pump. We've got a pump. We use an interpump, generally an interpump 16 litre a minute pump. We've got an unloader valve, and you've got your Venturi here. We use a 1.8 Venturi. You've got your filter back here on the water inlet. And then you've got your jumper cable here, which goes around to your reel. You've got a reel here. Generally, we use anything between 60 meters and 100 meters, depending on the setup in the back of the van. And you've got your tap, okay? So to run through it really quickly, the motor powers the coupling, which powers the pump. The pump pumps the water. It comes from the inlet here, goes into the pump. It pumps it then out through here, through the unloader valve, and out through into the hose, into the reel. So let's start off with the unloader valve, okay? This is a very important piece of equipment. Now, this particular one is an adjustable one, so you can turn the pressure up and down on it. When the machine is running, you can check the pressure on the machine. Generally, our machines are set for about 2,500 psi, but they can be turned up to about 3,000 psi, okay? So, you have the water running in from the pump, in from the tank, through the filter into the pump, okay? So the pump is always pumping. So once the engine's running, the pump is always pumping all the time, okay? And so the job of the unloader valve is to regulate the water. So when you've got your hand on the trigger of the gun and you're water blasting, once you let go of that trigger, there's no water coming out of the gun anymore. Now that water has to go somewhere because the pump is still pumping. The pump never stops pumping, okay? And so what the unloader valve does is it will kick in and feed the water back through this return pipe back into the tank again, okay? This is called a header tank, and that's the idea, so that when the unloader valve kicks in, it pumps the water back into the tank and it's not just being wasted on the ground, okay? So the water then flows out of here through your Venturi. This is what picks up your chemical, okay? And then it flows out here into the reel, okay? So the engines that we use, these are a Honda GX390 engine. They're a pull start engine because we find the pull starts are more reliable than the electric starts. You've got an on and off switch around the back here. So this is your on off switch. So this is how you switch it off. So to start it, you switch it on here, and then you pull start it, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to start the motor and how to switch on the hose. So the first thing is you got to make sure that you've got water in your tank. So I'm going to grab the hose. So this is our hose from the property. It goes on there, okay? Switch on the tap. And straight away, you can hear the water filling up in there, okay? So to start the motor, you've got to have this filled up. You've got to have water in the tank. So first thing you do when you pull up at a house to wash is you connect up the hose, okay? Once that's done, you can move on to the next thing then. So generally, what I like to do is if we're washing a house, I'll pull the hose all the way around the house before we start up the machine, okay? Now, it's really, really important that you make sure that your tap is open, okay? Because what happens is, when you start the motor, right, every time you pull the pull cord, it turns the engine over, right? That in turn turns the pump over, okay? And so if you pull this 3 or 4 times to start it, that's going to turn the pump over 3 or 4 times, which will actually pump water through the hose. Now, if your tap is closed, that then builds up pressure in your hose, right? And that will then stop the pump from turning, which will stop the engine from turning. And as you pull this, it'll all lock up and you'll break the pull cord, okay? So always make sure when you're rolling up the hose or when you're unrolling it and starting the engine, the tap is always open, okay? So let's pull this out a little bit. Okay, so that's out there. It's open. So the next thing I'm going to run through is I'm going to run through starting the machine. Okay, so what you need to do is make sure that the switch is on at the back, and then you come down here to this. So you've got 2 switches right here, right? You've got the fuel at the bottom and you've got the choke at the top. So with the fuel, this can be left on all the time. So you just leave that on the on position all the time. You don't need to change this, okay? Just leave it on all the time, okay? With the choke, you put the choke to on, so pull back this way, that is the choke on. And what you do is when you're trying to start it, when the engine is cold, you pull the choke, okay? If you're going to start the engine and the engine is hot, so if the engine's been running for a little while and you switched it off for a couple of minutes, then you don't need to put the choke on, okay? But if the engine is cold, so you're starting it for the first time in the morning, or you have stopped for lunch, or it's been off for maybe half an hour, or you've had to wait for the engine to cool down when you put petrol in it, because you have to wait for the engine to cool down before you put petrol in it, then you need to put the choke back on. So most of the time when you're starting it, you will have the choke on. It's only when the engine's still warm that you don't need to use it. So choke goes on, I'll then pull the cord, and once the engine starts, I then flick the choke back off again, okay? If I leave the choke on, the engine will rev really, really high, and the exhaust will get really, really hot. So fuel on, choke on, switch at the back on, and then I'm ready to pull it, and the tap is open. So what I do is I pull the cord a little bit, I wait till I get a bit of pressure on the cord, and then I give it a good pull. So when I want to switch the machine off, I just reach around the back and I switch it off, okay? Now, if the engine cuts out because it's run out of petrol, okay? The petrol goes in the top in here, okay? And you fill it up with your petrol can. Now, you've got to make sure that this exhaust, which gets very, very hot, even though it's only ran for about 30 seconds, that's hot now, okay? When you're filling this up, you've got to wait for this to cool down, okay? You should almost be able to touch this exhaust when you're pouring the petrol into it. If you pour the petrol into it while it's still hot, it can catch fire, okay? And then the petrol can will catch fire. So you've got to make sure that this is cool before you fill it up with petrol. You can't spill any petrol on this exhaust, okay? So now that we're finished doing what we need to do, okay, it's time to roll the hose up again. Now, I've got the tap closed on this, okay? So that means that there's going to be pressure in this hose. So I can't roll this up with pressure in it, okay? I've got to let the pressure off. So what do? I open the tap I let the pressure off. Now the hose is ready to be rolled up. Okay, now I can close the tap again to stop any water from dribbling out of it or leaking out of the hose. But tap has to be left open to roll up the hose. You can't roll it up under pressure. The hose doesn't like it. It'll start to crack. Okay? So the only other thing that we haven't covered in the back here is the venturi. Okay? So this is for your chemicals. You put this into your chemical bucket when you're ready to wash the house. Okay? And so that's everything in the back of the van.